Okay, right, so another one. What do we have to say? Well, we've got a lot to say, but we've got to try and cram it into a small amount of time. So this, I don't know, maybe we'll just do a rehearsal on this one and do it all again. A few things to say. Is it a disease? It's a virus that can cause disease. Obviously, I've given a various previous YouTubes. This is now an update, so this is becoming a regular daily thing. We are now 1:15 in the morning on the 8th of April. This is now the 5th of these I'm doing, so you can work back, and there should be one each day. I think you'll find there are. I might be slightly wrong on the early days on that. Yeah, I think I might have missed a day or two actually after the first one. Yeah. Okay. At one point I said it's not a disease. I was just doing my usual hesitation on things. Of course it's a disease. I don't think anyone really had any doubt on that. But don't forget, it's a virus that can cause a disease. So if you get infected and you're asymptomatic, then as far as you're concerned, it's actually not a disease. It's just something that came and went, like the fresh air that you breathed. It was no different. The pollen that you breathed, the smells from the road that you breathed, it was no different to you. Yeah. Now, I've been basically, if you go back and look at those, or you've come to me to this one because you've seen those previous YouTubes, you'll see that I was ranting and raving about my disappointment with the mathematical models. I didn't think they were good enough, and yet they'd influence policy all around the world, which has put people out of work. And I have to be honest, I'm not a mathematical person, but I have dealt with some mathematical models in the scope of being an immunologist. I haven't particularly dealt with epidemiological mathematical models. They're fairly new to me, I must be honest. Now, it seems that the prevailing mathematical models are built around the SIR model. You might want to call it the IRS model. Basically, the problem with the IRS model is that it's not, it only deals with, if you like, a year. So it deals with assumes the infection begins and then comes to a peak and then fades away. And that curve, where it goes up, up, up and down, up and down, up and down, they're saying let's flatten that and make it stretch it all out. Okay, so we're all with that. Yeah, I was with that around about the time that they were saying they needed to do it, in the sense that I knew they had to do something. I've been watching it. I was saying the moment it escaped China, I think we knew that we were watching it very closely, and the countries that it tended to go to early on, places like Singapore, Hong Kong, the Diamond Princess, we were watching it very closely to see could they contain it, because we knew as soon as they stopped containing it in the countries that were capable of containing it, it was going to be a nightmare for everyone. And it is. But we didn't, it's like knowing there's going to be a tsunami. You can't actually do very much about it. It doesn't actually improve your situation very much. If your job is to advise the government that this is coming and it's going to be a disaster, fine, get on with it. But it's not. I'm unemployed. Okay. I'd love to get back into immunology, don't get me wrong. And I keep my hand in, and I inform people I know, and I have various contacts, and I occasionally send them emails whether they listen. But the point is, I find myself in an interesting position. Okay, so I can talk to you, and I don't know, maybe you've never been to even a single lecture on science in your life, for example, and so you know, I try to both. If you'll notice on YouTube, some of these are high expert level and they'll be over most people's heads. Others, there'll maybe be a news coverage show and maybe even that's a bit over your head. And then others, you try to explain it so any person who really wants to make the effort can at least have a rough idea. And I guess I'm somewhere like, I want everyone to understand it, but I know they can't. And so every now and then I'll have a go at a top expert, partly, quite possibly, I don't know the answer and maybe there is an answer out there that I can find. So by putting these YouTubes out there, someone somewhere might say, oh, go and have a look at that website, it will help you. Otherwise, I'm just on my own, you see. What am I going to do? Wait for my mental health advisor to tell me the answer? You know what? They don't know. Okay, so I've got to look at it myself in the end. And where do you start? So these are really good for me. I find they're helping my mental health. You know, even if I only get 1 or 2 views, at least there's a chance I'll get an answer back. If I don't do it, there's a chance I'll just be lost in not knowing. And the more you know, the more you should be able to contribute and help. And if you can't, it drives you up the bloody wall. So I have a list of about 5 sites on YouTube that offer explanations of how epidemiological monitoring, epidemiological mathematical models are built. There's apparently some good ones from this guy from Oxford called, it's written here, next page, Tom Rocks Maths. Okay, there's another one by a guy called Treffer Bazette. There's another one by somebody called QuantPy. I think there were 2 by Tom Rocks Maths, and there were 2 by 3 Blue 1 Brown. And 3 Blue 1 Brown actually linked me to a recommended site which is going to dominate the most of what I say on this one, because it was quite interesting and quite useful, and it wasn't stuff I didn't really know, but it gives me a good framework to talk about. And of course, mathematical models themselves, they provide a framework. They allow scientists who perhaps understand patients or the results that they've had from their experiments to put them in a framework where everyone understands the basic model that we're all working to. But then you say, but of course the model says this, but then the data nudges it this way on this occasion. On another occasion it might nudge it a different way, and then you might have to say, well, the model now has to expand like a tree, has to now have a branch here and a branch here, depending on some factor that we perhaps don't always know what it is, that pushes it one way on some occasion, pushes it another way on another occasion. But before that, it's a very simplistic model, like the letter Y. The letter Y is just a trunk with 2 branches. That's the basic model, and then from there you maybe build extra branches onto that. But you can say, well, you can always remember the basic model was a Y in that one. Yeah. But the basic model apparently is SIR-IRS or SEIR, depending on who you ask. One of the most important ones, of course, was the Imperial College model, because that influenced people certainly in the United Kingdom, i.e. Boris Johnson, who's spending his 2nd night tonight in intensive care. By the way, it's quite late at night, I've got to whisper a little bit, because I've got neighbours, you know. And so this model is really important, but I can't find anything on it on YouTube, okay? And that concerns me. Why can't I find something on YouTube on the Imperial College model? I can only assume that all the models I can find on YouTube that relate to epidemiology are the same as the Imperial College model, which perhaps has some finer points. Now, one of the best things I did see on YouTube was the epidemiological modelling aspect of one of the 2 by this guy, 3 Blue 1 Brown, who, funny enough, was running the software. He was running the simulation software almost as if he'd sort of stolen it and was releasing it in a sort of almost a Snowden or a WikiLeaks sort of way, because he was saying, look what happens when we run this software and the little dots run around and they bounce off each other and they get sick and they die, or they go to this special room, or they all go to the shop together and things like that. It's brilliant. I really recommend everyone watches it, yeah, because it was that made me fully understand what they were really going on about. But it wasn't done by a mathematical modeler of who influences governments. It was just done by some mathematician who happened to get hold of the software, plug a few bits of data in and say, I can explain it to you. I don't need to be an epidemiologist. I'm a mathematician with my hands on the right software. Thank you very much. Okay, so I've also learned that apparently it's quite common for Parliament to break up. Obviously we know around summer and Christmas they have their holidays like anyone else. They're currently in Easter recess, so I apologise when I said our entire democracy had been thrown out the window or whatever it was I said along those lines, and that is that it hasn't. We do still have it. It's just they've taken an early break and they're going to stay off just like everyone else, and merge it with their Easter holidays and come back probably after Easter. Okay, I've got no idea how these reflections on my specs are going to come out, but they look quite cool actually, don't they? Oh, I've got quite a high-tech set of specs. I should do it like this. Anyway, I don't know what that is. It's some kind of techno from like China or something. Oh, don't ask. Okay. So PMQ is Easter recess, rose early, Parliament. There we go. Done. So there's no PMQs at the moment because they're just having an extended holiday. I disagree. I think they should have done a Zoom thing, and we should all be able to watch Prime Minister's Questions Time as a big Zoom. And you know, might be another reason why he's in hospital, because he didn't do that. He just said we'll have a few extra weeks off like everyone else. Fuck it. I hope he doesn't die. I really do. I really do. Yeah, no, I really do. Beautiful. And I do mean that. I'm not a raving Tory, and I'm not a raving lefty. I'm actually sort of a little bit green, I suppose. But I've got big problems with the Tories, and I've got big problems with Labour. And the Greens, they've got no financial acumen, have they? They've got no. The economy would be collapsed. It would completely be disastrous. They're even further behind Labour when it comes to managing the economy. So I think we need kind of a we need some kind of. I'm not going to get into politics. Sorry. Why am I getting distracted? I've had a Guinness. That's probably why. So be prepared. Worst case scenarios: drugs, vaccines fail. I hope you heard what I said. Drugs and vaccines fail. Give you an example. Tuberculosis. Drugs don't really work very well for it. Vaccines don't really work very well for it. Is it a disaster for public health? In some places, yeah, but it doesn't spread very easily. So therefore we don't see an epidemic. It's R0, as the epidemiologists like to refer to, as we've probably all been hearing about, is less than 1, whereas this pandemic of ours is more than 1, and that means it goes up, whereas tuberculosis more or less goes down. So what are we going to do? Be prepared, be prepared, be prepared. So I'm trying to prepare you guys for the worst case scenario. In other words, you know, we're sort of future planners here. We're preparing. It's the same as if you dig your own garden and have your own vegetables, and you're ready for a nuclear apocalypse, and you can be self-sufficient, you can feed yourselves, you can, get through life. I'm trying to say, look, what happens if the worst case scenario, the drugs and the vaccines don't work? And it's a very realistic possibility. And I'll tell you how I know it, because I worked in a drug company for a while, and we didn't get any drugs, in that period. Nobody could say we put a drug on the shelf. Now I know there's a lot on the shelf already, and I know there's a lot of drug companies, but I was working for Wellcome, which became GlaxoSmithKline, Glaxo Wellcome, and then GlaxoSmithKline. And although GlaxoSmithKline probably put some drugs on the shelf, nothing that our immunology department was working on got there, because the pipeline is so difficult to get drugs into the pipeline. They might have got a few to first phase clinical trials, phase 1. They might have had one already in phase 2 or phase 3. They had some monoclonal antibody, I think, that got that failed at certain stages, but is actually now being used for some clinical situations, but it's perhaps not as big as they originally hoped for. So I think we need a hefty dose of realism, a hefty dose of skepticism and a hefty dose of realism. Now, I've said here, solved by infection. How do I mean that? That is because if the drugs and the vaccines don't work, then the only way we can get our economy working again is if people get infected and recover. and those people run the economy from there on. They run all the business, they get all the jobs, because everyone else is either waiting to get sick or is sick or is dead. So it's going to be, and of course if they're waiting, if they haven't got it yet, then they're in that category of susceptible, of the S for of the IRS models, susceptible. So you can't guarantee running your country when you've got half of it susceptible. They could go down at any point. Whereas you can guarantee your country's economy if you're basing it on recovered, but not dead. Sometimes recovered includes the population that are dead, because for the mathematics, they don't contribute, apparently. I think there's a big difference between the two myself. Okay, very real possibility. Now, I'm gonna skip forward. I'm going to skip forward because it's such an interesting thing here. The talk I was telling you about comes from this Professor Nicholas Jewell. He works at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and, get this, also University of California, Berkeley. He gives a talk, and it's on the internet, goes on for about an hour or so. It's incredibly boring, got lots of maths in it, lots of equations and Greek letters, excuse me, things like this. Okay. But what he told me, amongst other things, is a quote from Chris Whitty, currently our Chief Medical Officer, from 2015, which is now 5 years ago. Chris Whitty said this. How do I get this? The tendency of some modelers to present them as scientific predictions of the future rather than models does not help. Models are widely used in government, and some models have arguably too much influence. They are generally most useful when they identify impacts of policy decisions which are not predictable by common sense. The key is usually that that's not that they are right, but that they provide an unexpected insight. So I think what he's saying, because that's the end of what he said there, is I think what he's saying is that very often we can create a model and it tells us what we already knew. On those occasions they're right. Every now and then we're not sure if they're right, but if they are, we better take them bloody seriously, because we would never have thought of that if it weren't for what the computer told us. Because basically it doesn't make sense. Okay, so now here's this Chris using the imperial model to convince good old Boris Johnson of something, and meanwhile they're washing their hands, not wearing masks, and they both get sick. Now, I don't know about you, but I sometimes wear a mask. I hardly ever bother washing my hands because I don't bump into people and go out much, so I don't see any point. The virus hasn't got into me, but they got sick, I didn't. I'm not entirely sure what to make from that scientific observation, but make of it what you will. Now, the point is that the Imperial College model apparently said something that led to something that Professor Nick Jewell said. He said, the Imperial College model, the importance of it, the significance of it, was that it told government any action you're going to take it now, not next week. And apparently there were about 100 scientists who signed some letter telling the government to act now. Well, I mean, I tell you, there's more than 100 scientists in this country, so a lot of them didn't sign up to that one. I was one of them. Now let's just reiterate. I was watching this phenomenon from when it was first noticed in December. Pretty sure I first noticed in December when the chap said, well, there is this outbreak in China that I'm a bit worried about, but you know, if it's as bad as I think it is, we'll soon see. And I would say it should be reported as a serious outbreak. And so I heard about that and I latched onto it, and it did become that serious outbreak. And I think I'm not sure, did I say about when we were watching it and we were seeing in the early stages, we knew when it had escaped, and we knew it was going to hit. We knew it was going to be trouble because we knew we couldn't do the kind of lockdown that China did, which meant that seeing as containing it was now no longer possible. We knew it was going to be a case of just having to live with it. And yes, of course, meanwhile, I think probably what happened was a lot of the stock market said, well, don't worry, we've got drugs companies, they'll come up with a drug. We've got vaccine companies, they'll come up with a vaccine. They didn't realise what an epidemic was. They didn't realise that it was lethal, that it was that deadly. And also, the modellers who were predicting it to Imperial College, I'm still not convinced, were telling the government that it was, as I found out on Newsnight, thanks to Emily Maitlis. That was very good. She was the expert on tonight's show. Well, was yesterday's show. And his name was Mr. Mark Woolhouse. And he is the Professor of Epidemiology at Edinburgh University. So what Woolhouse has managed to come up with, there you are. He has decided to tell us, for the first time on British television as far as I'm concerned, and I actually applauded this, he said segmentation. What? I don't know what segmentation is, I'm sorry. Then he explained it. He said, this is a public health burden that affects primarily the elderly. An epidemiologist who recognises there is segmentation here. Did the model include that? I don't know. And he agreed that basically, as part of the way out of this, we need to protect them and their care workers and their close family if they're living with them. But with the other 80%, we can relax these measures. And I'm quite chuffed, because that's what I've been saying all along. And of course, coming from Edinburgh University is quite useful, because I've been trying to get my message across to various people, include somebody at Cambridge University, my mentor, who was at Imperial College but has now moved to Edinburgh University. So maybe that nudge towards Edinburgh University has come out and they've decided to ask an expert from there, and he's come up with a winning answer. So well done, Edinburgh. So the point being that when I look at all these models, and I'm going to try and find a way to list all these 5 models, or whatever it is, these 5 websites, so you can go and have a look at them if you want, but 3 blue, 1 brown, you might want to look that one up. The problem with all of them is none of them consider what happens next season. So I've got two burning issues. One is now got a name, and that name is segmentation. Just explain that. Old people, young people. The next burning issue is, what do we do about next season? Well, I can tell you from what they're not telling you. I'll just do some more of this. We're going to do it all again. We're going to do it all again. We're going to do it all again. Lockdown, 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 lockdown. I'm telling you, we are, because there's nothing they can do to... They're not going to have a vaccine in time for next winter. And you know what? They're probably not going to have a vaccine in time for the winter after that either. We're going to do it all again. Part two, part two, part two. What are we going to do, guys? I mean, I live lockdown anyway, but you guys are young. You don't want this shit. I only live locked down because I ain't got any money, I ain't got a job. What can you do? You know, I can go out stealing, but normally you go out without money, without a job. You're either coming home straight away or you're taking a very, very, very strange fantasy ride through life, you know, involving sleeping on the street, usually, that kind of thing. So I sort of saw that coming a long time ago, and I tried my very best to avoid it. Okay. I personally am willing to agree with what Professor Jewell said. Not high school Jewell. No, she is tasty. She is tasty boys, trust me. But no, not high school Jewell. I'm willing to agree that 86% of infections, of all infections, I think were undocumented prior to the Wuhan shutdown. I've got problems reading my notes here, even with my specs on. I'm willing to agree that 86% of all infections we undocumented prior to the Wuhan shutdown. Okay, so were undocumented, yeah. Yeah, so basically, when Wuhan was happening, they'd done some tests, but they think most of those were asymptomatic and nobody knew they had it, going around saying, I've got a cough, got a fever, so what? And it makes sense because nobody had even heard of COVID-19 back then. Okay. We can mention the R0 because that's important for epidemiologists. If you don't know what that is, you might as well just, you know, you're going to get booted off until you do. Booted off the bus, booted off the cosmic bus that takes us geniuses around the Skylab or whatever it is. And if you don't know R0, you're not welcome on the bus. It's 1.4 to 3.8 apparently. Simple slide equals value of mitigation measures. I'm telling you that is too simplistic. The value of mitigation measures, you know, this comes down to this was something to do with Professor Jewell. If you listen to Professor Jewell, when he gets to the state, just before he mentions St. Louis and Philadelphia, where he mentions the Imperial College model, and he goes a simple slide with value of mitigation measures. Well, that's way too simple, Professor Jewell. But what I've realised is, I don't want to challenge you. I want to be a keen student. And as part of that, I realise that you've considered everything I'm talking about. But what I'm not convinced is that you're not trying to pull the wool over my government's eyes and make our economy crash. That you're not working for, like, you know, some Dr. Evil somewhere. So that's why I ask these questions, and I think I'm entitled to the answers. Especially because I know that Mateless, she might have a degree in economics, but she hasn't got a fucking clue when it comes to epidemiology of pandemics. Thank you. Okay, so Louis v. Philadelphia. Yeah, 1918. Anyone who's ever studied epidemiology, again, if you want to be on the bus, you've got to know about St. Louis versus Philadelphia. This is where, in fact, Philadelphia, they were slightly, I think it was Philadelphia, they were slightly ahead of the infection. So, and they didn't lock down. St. Louis saw it coming and they did lock down. St. Louis did better. In other words, they imposed certain social distancing measures, such as closing shops and things like that, and it allowed them to flatten their curve. And in fact, it's those two curves. I think Philadelphia goes right up, and St. Louis goes right along. So it's exactly what it's classical. It's just what the models predict, and the models probably came out after St. Louis and Philadelphia, after the pandemic of 1918 of influenza, Spanish flu, after that happened. Now here's another classic, Lodi versus Bergamo. Okay, again, the same thing happened there. Village of Lodi was ahead of the, got hit before Bergamo. But they saw it, they knew it was coming, they knew it was Wuhan, and so they shut down. And they did all right. But Bergamo, who actually got hit after Lodi, didn't bother shutting down at all. They were too big and important. And they got hammered, right? Now, the important thing with all of this is, with all these curves that go up and then across and down, like some kind of mountain, you go up the mountain, then you ski down the other side, they all do that, like that all the time. But every season, this is going to go up and down. So if it comes up here and comes down, and that's where we're perhaps at, as soon as Boris takes his foot off the accelerator, it's going up again, and he goes off the brake, and then he puts his foot back on the brake, take it down. And this can't go on forever, because if it does, it's just grinding to a halt. It's like anyone driving an HGV, slams on the brakes, he's going really fast, slams on the brakes, and then says, oh, okay, phew, I can start going again. And then he slams on the brakes again, and then he slams on the brakes again, and then he slams on the brakes again. Until what? Until we've completely ground to a halt, Boris. You see, I know you're tired and you're in hospital and you can't be dealing with me. So I don't know who's going to listen to this message. Okay, so he talks about waves. Yeah, waves. So the point being, none of these modelers have shown me what happens when the next wave comes. You know, how long it takes, when it takes, and I think they're afraid, because if they had admitted to us, you know, they're happy, they've got their way, they've stopped a lethal disease, but now the SHIT is going to hit the fan, because they're going to have to admit that under pressure, under enormous economic pressure, to the point where the Chancellor is going to have to ask them. You know, there's Rishi, he's turned up there. He's got 10 years of austerity measures in the bag, and he was going to spend it on HS2 and HS3. The Prime Minister had these great dreams and visions. And let's be honest, I think that's why the Prime Minister's in hospital tonight, because this pandemic has broken his heart. And he's still got fighting spirit. He's still the Prime Minister. He's still a fighter. And he's still got a beautiful wife and a child on the way. So he's not done and dusted yet. I mean, he's not in his coffin yet. That's for sure. But you know, let's be honest. He's got dreams of improving public transport in Britain, and they've been taken away. Rishi Sunak has just turned up and said, "I've got loads of money, and I'm going to spend it however I want to make me look good, and to make Boris look human." Whereas what I would actually say, if I was in that position, I would say, look, no way is anyone getting their hands on HS2 and HS3 money. No way is anyone going to crash my economy and destroy all these small businesses. If I was into Tory politics, which supports small businesses very, very strongly, always has done. No way am I going to say you lot can all go off and have an extended holiday and sit at home, and children don't have to learn their lessons and do their exams. I'm completely honest with you. I would not have agreed with them. I would have said, no, put masks on them, see what that does to the curve first. That's bought me a week. In that week, I would have said, who's the real problem here? Well, it's old people. So I would have said, old people self-isolate. Anyone has to go and see them has to wear that special protective clothing that they wear in hospitals. PPE, yeah. And then I would have said, okay, that's bought me That actually might have bought me a month. And then we would look. Then we would sit and look at it and watch the hospitals fill up. And then when the hospitals fill up and people get sick and we're burying loads of them, I would have built all those Nightingale hospitals. And then I would be continually watching Italy and saying we've got 2 weeks knowledge on Italy, and we've been watching this ever since it left China. We can watch what Taiwan have done. We can watch what Korea have done. We can watch what Singapore and Hong Kong have done. And I would say, what are they doing? They've almost contained it, but not quite. But they're continuing containment measures, i.e. testing, contact tracing, as well as severe lockdown. And I would say, right, we ramp up the testing and we try and continue trying to contain it from here. But we don't have to lock down the economy. We don't have to stop people going to school. I would have looked into alternative methods. If you can work from home, I would have encouraged those people to do so. But already, people still like to go into work, don't they, when you tell them, you know. So we could have done something like put a massive tax on fuel. So the only people who go to work are the people that absolutely have to. That would have raised money and not lost money. I wouldn't have paid anyone not to go to work. We would have kept the money in the bank. We would have been a wealthy economy, and we would have been able to compete with the Far East economies like China, Japan, Taiwan, and Singapore, who in a year's time are going to be treating us like slaves. We're 36 minutes and 33 seconds in. I've still got a little bit more to say. So this brilliant epidemiologist, Nick Jewell, he was talking about waves, but he didn't really show them on any modelling charts or anything like that. He said they were only stoppable with a vaccine. You know, I've had another battle now. This is going to be my second battle with an epidemiologist on the idea that vaccines solve the problem. The other one was with some, I think, Australian guy who wrote some article. Anyone who follows my Facebook can pick it up for me. I can't do it just offhand, and I'm tired. And it was something like, I basically tried to debunk a guy who said that there's no point in talking about herd immunity unless you have a vaccine. Completely and utter rubbish. And it goes back to the first thing I said on this video, which was the virus is not the disease. The disease is things like ARDS. It's the series of symptoms that are caused when some people get this virus. And because of that, you can use the virus the way he's saying you can only do this with a vaccine. You can use the people who are infected, or you can deliberately, if you allow people to get infected. And that is still core to my argument. And I've not yet had anyone come back to me on any of my YouTube channels or any of my emails I've sent out or any of my Facebook posts where I challenge people to debate this subject, debate it openly, question me, challenge me. Nobody's dared to do it yet, not politely, not friendly. To be honest, not at all. Not a sausage, not a crumb of challenge have I faced. Okay? He said, when asked a question, what's the worst case scenario here? He said 1 to 2 years. He didn't know, but he didn't show what would happen when the foot was taken off the brake and the uninfected suddenly became infected because there was no vaccine. He didn't even try to plug any vaccine data in because he knew, realistically, it's going to be probably, I mean, it's fanciful of Fauci to say 1 year. He says 1 to 1.5 years, but it's fanciful, even though they're in the testing phase now. Even though President Trump is trying to tell you, oh, we'll just speed everything up. It's never been done in less than 5 years. So it's not that it's not like, well, if we really pull together, there's limits. You know, there's limits to actually, you know, that you simply can't do things faster. And don't forget, if he says, well, we'll work as hard as we can and we'll push this through, even if they were to get it through in a year, there's no guarantee it's going to work. And plus, having made a bit of it and got it through clinical trials, you need to have enough to give it to people, and that takes time because you've got to usually grow a biological form. So you've got to then harvest that biological form. You've got to harvest it and deliver it around the world and administer it to, nurses have got to give you your jab down at the clinic. I know it'll be the only thing we're thinking about doing, but will it? Because by then, some element of relaxation of these control measures will have happened, so we'll be working a bit more than we are now. Of course, some of us are working flat out. It's the middle of the night for me. Right. Here's an interesting thing. Nick Jewell said, in the Spanish flu, some people got reinfected and their infection was worse the second time round. That was flu. There is people who talk about this disease. Apparently, sometimes people can be reinfected. This also seems to suggest that because it's so fast, so soon after their first exposure, suggests that they never fully cleared the virus, and also suggests that the virus mutated inside them and came back at them. Very, very possible. It's possible that they carried two strains, and one of them they fought off, and the other one was resistant. And so that's exactly the same kind of problem that I'm saying is likely to be a problem with vaccines. You give somebody a vaccine, first of all, it might not cure everyone, but let's assume it cures everyone. But there's two ways of looking at it with the vaccine. Sometimes you might give the vaccine to somebody who's got the disease. That was how rabies vaccines worked. Initially, if somebody got a bite, Pasteur was giving the vaccines as soon as they came in, because it was helping, as far as I recall. I'm happy to be corrected on this if I'm wrong, but the TV show I saw when I was a kid said people were being given this vaccine as soon as they knew they'd been bitten, and it was protecting them against the rabies that would have developed from the bite in a way that had never been seen before. So sometimes vaccines can be given like that as soon as the earliest possibility after infection. Also, if you've got a hospital full of people that are sick and you've suddenly got a vaccine, I'm pretty sure you'll go along and give them a jab of it to see if it saves their life. So those people, that vaccine might cure them in, say, 99% of their disease might go, but that little 1% might come back a couple of weeks later because it was naturally resistant to the vaccine. That virus might have been naturally resistant to the immune cells that the vaccine supported. Yeah. So it's kind of like some of the viruses, because they're mutating, will be themselves immune to the vaccine and the immune system that responds to the vaccine. And interestingly, and here's a big point for those of us who work on mutation, what that says is a virus is absolutely tiny and has a very small genome. It doesn't have, if you ask them, it doesn't really have an immune system, but it does have immune mechanisms of evading attack. And one of them is the simplest thing of all, just mutate a little bit here and there, and you can escape. That's what it says. Meet healthcare needs, or something about getting a second wave and to do with modelling. Okay, so he was talking about how the healthcare, the models have moved more towards how to meet healthcare needs and whether we can actually have enough ventilators and things like that. So I'm not interested personally in that aspect of the models, and I'm quite happy for the experts who plugged all this data into the models to say, well, that's important. Of course it's important. Of course it influences policy and direct policy, but what I'm getting at is whether they've actually thought this through, a little bit. How do I do that? A little bit further, a little bit, what is that? A little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit. Have they thought it right through? Have they thought it through? Yeah. WHO, World Health Organization. what template for bringing things back up? You see, he mentioned second wave, and second wave is what I call next season. Yeah. And he says in terms of bringing things back up, in other words, going back to work, reversing shelter in place. Reversing shelter in place. That's what we're doing at the moment. Social isolating, social distancing and social isolating is called shelter in place. I think that's what he meant when he said those terms, yeah. So he's on about reversing the lockdown, yeah. He talked about tests, how we've got a PCR test that detects RNA, how there's a serological test coming along that detects antibody. The PCR is good, I'm putting this bit in now, the PCR is good for detecting the problem in the present. The serological is good for detecting what happened in the past. Okay. As for those tests, well, look, this is a really difficult one. We're at 46 minutes. I'm going to do a separate one for testing. It can wait. It's not urgent.